Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. At the beginning of the day. Damn it. I swore under my breath. Not for the first time in the last 2 weeks, I sincerely regretted, that I had contacted Rita Heinous at all. What did my old man say? Never shit where you eat. Maybe he didn't specify the location, but it definitely applied to Rita. She was not only the wife of our neighbor, Ashton Heinous, a soft-bodied laboratory assistant at the local laboratory of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, but also an old friend of my wife. At least, Willa considered her a friend. I'm sure that what Rita was doing during those afternoon sessions at home and in the car went beyond any definition of friendship, even the broadest possible one. She obviously gave it her all that first time. To her twisted mind, I was probably some kind of trophy, something else that she managed to steal from her friends. Most likely, I was the last in a line of boyfriends and husbands of friends whom she managed to fuck behind the backs of their girlfriends or wives as part of her dissolute hobby, which she revived a few years ago. Back in high school, some of my drinking buddies at the local bar told me Rita was legendary. She slept with an entire football team. Some of her cheerleaders got into fights with her after rumors spread that she was spreading her hips or lips for their boyfriends. I've always been amazed by the fact that she's kept some friends since those days. They quarreled, but remained close. Especially Will, who was as different from Rita as the sun was from the moon. Everyone knew that Willa was a quiet, sweet girl, and Rita was a bitch who didn't think about cheating her friends for something she wanted. Despite all Rita's antics, none of the girls acted wisely. They did not break off relations with her. Even when Becky looked like she was about to explode after finding her husband in deep throes of ecstasy and equally deep in Rita's throat, Rita's monosyllabic statement always managed to silence the group. Remember, you owe me. This phrase inevitably caused silence and guilty glances among the ladies. I remembered this case when the claws were released. Literally. And that phrase made those painted nails stop just before they would have ripped open Rita's skin. No matter how much I asked Willa about the story behind Rita's magic phrase, she just refused to talk about it. It was only through a combination of accidentally overheard conversations and urban gossip that I was able to piece together the fact that Rita's past and her transformation into an urban cheater is largely due to an unfortunate prank, date rape, and a boy named Steve. In fact, the time I mentioned all three of these facts in front of Rita, she got furious and kicked me out of her house with my pants down to my knees. I was just glad there were no witnesses, or so I thought. Willa didn't tell me anything about Rita when we first got married. And, to be honest, in the early years Rita seemed completely normal, like any ordinary housewife who lived in our neighborhood. Everything has changed in the last couple of years. At parties where her friends came with their boyfriends or partners, women invariably watched their men with eagle eyes when Rita appeared. There were times when husbands or guilty male companions ran after angry women who were running away from a party, and Rita looked at them with a Cruella de Vil smile. Probably patent. Willa didn't tell me anything about Rita when we first got married. And, to be honest, in the early years Rita seemed completely normal, like any ordinary housewife WV our neighborhood. Everything has changed in the last couple of years. At parties where her friends came with their boyfriends or partners, women invariably watched their men with eagle eyes when Rita appeared. There were times when husbands or guilty male companions ran after angry women who were running away from a party, and Rita looked at them with a Cruella de Vil smile, probably patented. In one memorable case, Elaine's husband, Vic, was seen running after her with the front of his shirt fluttering from an unbuttoned fly. However, in the small town in which we all lived, there was an absurd need to maintain visibility, so no one condemned Rita for what she did. No one told Ashton about this either, who most often worked hard at his job and skipped all social gatherings, trying to provide a better life for his wife. As Willa reported after she tried to talk to the guy, she had a dilemma. She wanted to warn Ashton about the danger his marriage was in, but she didn't dare sell her best friend. Looking back, I can't remember exactly what attracted me to Rita. I thought she was disgusting when she revived her career as a neighborhood cheater. I felt sorry for Ashton that he had a wife who made a cuckold out of him. Of course, none of these thoughts occurred to me on that hot autumn evening when I was thoughtfully drinking beer on the porch, and this peroxide blonde spoke to me. It didn't help that Willa and I had one. Oh, looking back, I can't remember exactly what attracted me. Toa thought she was disgusting when she revived her career as a neighborhood cheater. I felt sorry for Ashton that he had a wife who made a CLD out of him. Of course, none of these thoughts occurred to me on Thought Autumn evening, when I was thoughtfully drinking beer on the porch, and this peroxide blonde spoke to me. It didn't help that Willa and I had one of our quiet arguments that night about bills and the future of the garage, and she took the kids to her sister's for a sleepover. Well, I was still paying all the bills, wasn't I? I didn't stop her from going to work when she wanted to, although I would have. Could anyone blame me if I succumbed to temptation and got a small chance to blow off steam with a woman? As funny as it seemed, my only thought was, this has nothing to do with Willa. It's just something for yourself. Of course, I deserve something for myself. Somehow, despite everything I did to prevent the disaster, it turned from a one-time mistake into a full-fledged novel the very next day. Washing my face in the bathroom, I even convinced myself that alcohol and depression were to blame for everything, and I would be able to sort everything out with Rita and clarify everything so that Willa would never find out and would not suffer from it. It sounded reasonable in the bathroom. I came out of the bathroom with brazen confidence and fussed, trying my best to clean everything up while Rita lay and looked at me with a smile on her face. Suppressing the urge to use her again, I told her in as cold a voice as possible to get her ass out of this place before my wife returned. Why? Are you feeling unwell, lover boy? I'm not your lover. I don't love you. I love my wife. I growled, clenching my jaw. Her narrowed eyes told me that I had angered her. Really? It's ironic when you're still dripping off me, don't you think? The venom in that hiss made my blood run cold. What do you want, Rita? I want more of what happened last night, more of what Willa has had all these years. I knew she'd made a good deal when she got involved with a tough biker. I just never thought he was that good. In the light of day, Rita's antics looked just vulgar. Even the sight of her licking those red-hot lips made me uneasy. I couldn't figure out what I saw in her the night before. Seeing the rebellion of what lay between my legs against the voice of reason, which disappeared into the white noise of lust, Rita smiled and said, well, part of someone agrees, even if he denies it. The ringing of the clock made the haze of lust that was quickly enveloping my senses stop. Damn it. I can't handle it right now. Just get your ass out of this house before Willa comes back with the kids. From the look of anger on Rita's face, I realized that I was about to have a hell of a car in my hands. So you think you can use me and just throw me away like some kind of trash? Hissed Rita. Her claws were ready. They were going to skin me today. I was saved by the sound of a motor pulling up to the next entrance. A quick glance out the window told me it was Ashton returning from the night shift. Listen, I said, guiding the furious woman to the back door. If you don't want domestic scenes and a divorce from your husband, you'd better go back to your home. We can settle this another day. I saw the indecision on Rita's face and realized that I had almost managed to escape. She knew she would lose everything she had if Ashton divorced her, and although she might upset the relationship between Willa and me, she would get nothing from us. The practical Rita got the upper hand and, with a hard look that promised retribution for my treatment of her, left through the back door. After waiting a couple of minutes and not hearing the sounds of a fight or an outraged husband ready to take revenge from the next house, I relaxed a little and started putting the house in a state that did not scream to Willa, I just used your best friend in our house. After that weekend, the relationship between Willa and me really got better. I would be the first to admit that part of the reason for this could be my attempt to get rid of the nagging guilt that plagued me after making love to Rita. I know, nothing can make up for having an affair with your wife's best friend. But what could I do? It happened. Shit happens. I just had to move on and try my best not to mess up the situation. And I tried. Just a week. The next weekend, the neighbors had a barbecue party. Apart from the heat coming from the glowing coals, Rita did her best to raise the temperature. She dressed up in an ensemble that revealed more than it hid. In fact, the shorts were so tight that I swear most of the guys at the party caught glimpses of the camel's foot that she showed off every time she bent at the waist. I know that all this sounds like an excuse for a bastard who couldn't move away from a mistake he had already made and should know better so as not to repeat it. But tell that to 10 hot men under the age of 90, and 9 of them will look guilty, wiping drool from their chins at the sight of such a mistake. Once again, Jackson Jr. got me into trouble. Rita quickly spilled a jug of sweet tea on her forehead, making her daring outfit completely obscene. The way she looked at me, pretending to wipe herself dry, left no doubt that this was not an accident. Muttering some polite excuse when she asked me for help, I led her away from the party, barely paying attention to the sharp stares that followed us. Once in the cool darkness of the pantry, or at least I think that's where we ended up, she was on top of me before I could say a word. I don't think I would have said anything very reasonable at that moment. Before I could react, the door flew open abruptly, and 3 more of Willa's friends stood and looked at the guilty adulterers who stood with biological evidence of their infidelity adorning their bodies. After recovering from the shock, Rita went on the offensive. She was yelling at Elaine and Becky, who were busy photographing the culprits. Caught off guard and facing almost certain death, I paid no attention to the verbal battle between Rita and her 2 friends. I did not bother Lisa either, who stood and looked at me with her mouth open. As I pulled on my jeans and prepared for hell to descend on me, snatches of their conversation danced on the periphery of my ears. Well, then you'll have to share it. No, damn it. It's a pity, you fool. Unless you want all these photos to appear on social media and Ashton to kick you out on your ass without a dime. When Rita turned and looked at me with pursed lips and a greedy gleam lit up in Elaine and Becky's eyes, I realized that everything was going downhill fast. Jackson, you're going to have a couple of playmates for the next couple of months, Rita said, openly sulking. What do you mean? Of course, these women can't mean it. No, that would be crazy. They're all Willa's friends. Elaine was the first to reply dryly. Our local cheater wants to say that she will share you with us for the next couple of months. You won't have a problem with that, will you? But you're Willa's friends. I can't. We can't. That didn't stop you from using her, Becky said hoarsely, her contemptuous nod clearly pointing at Rita. It was a mistake. Was that your first mistake? Elaine asked while I was stuttering. Why are you doing this to Willa? The silence that followed, as the 3 women looked at each other and then focused on Rita and me, made me think that I had found a way out. This hope was dispelled almost immediately. Technically, it was the cheating Rita who stole from Willa. Now we are stealing from her, and only after all that she stole from us. Payback is a couple of fools. Elaine giggled. You can't do that. I'm not some kind of toy. And you think Rita thinks you're someone else? The calm seriousness of Lisa's words drowned out the protests that rose in my throat and died on my lips. I looked at the women who surrounded me. They were all attractive in a way, and it wouldn't be a burden to use them. In a perverted manner, I was probably fulfilling some kind of perverted fantasy using the wives of several men. That's how my second career as a neighborhood cheater began. Although it doesn't compare to the first time I chose pussies, the variety was enough to make up for that dry period when I was a monogamous married man. I had no illusions that these women were in love with me. No, the fact is that they saw making love to me as a way to repay Rita and their husbands. At first, I was intrigued by how naturally they behaved around Willa, despite the fact that they were openly making love to their friend's husband. Looking back, I realized how easily they were hypocritical that early autumn evening. That night, I used not only Rita, but also Elaine and Becky, both in Becky's car. The couple went to get painkillers and ice at a local pharmacy and supermarket located a short drive away. However, Becky's car started to stall, and guess who was supposed to come to their rescue? Elaine's painkiller turned out to be a good lovemaking in the back seat of Becky's car. Becky used an ice pack after I slammed her hard against the steering wheel. Twice. She had slight skin burns on her chest and back, which would have been difficult for her to explain if she hadn't applied ice. It so happened that we had to wait for Becky to bring another bag of ice and Elaine to bring some wet wipes to remove the traces of our lovemaking before we returned to the party. As an engine repair expert, I explained our 2-hour absence from the party by the lack of spark plugs to replace the faulty ones in Becky's car. While I avoided Willa's gaze for the rest of that night and felt guilty, none of her supposed friends seemed to feel any guilt towards her. In truth, they joked and laughed around Willa as naturally as if they hadn't just made love to her husband. Lisa was the most indecisive of them all. At first I thought she had decided to choose the right path and avoid me. It made me respect her. After all, I hadn't gone so far as not to perceive what I had done as a betrayal of my wedding vows. One day, she showed up drunk when I was at Rita's meeting with the main cheater. It looks like she needed to strengthen her nerves with alcohol before using me. Before I started taking off her clothes, she asked me, with a curious twinkle of rage in her eyes, if I usually use other people's wives. I was annoyed by her arrogant manner, especially since she obviously succumbed to temptation herself, and replied rather rudely that I only use those women who ask me to do it, whether they are wives or someone else. The rage seemed to drain out of her, and she closed her eyes, surrendering to me. During a later meeting, which took place in Becky's bathroom at her insistence, she even admitted that she was thinking of leaving her husband for me. When she saw the look of horror on my face, she laughed bitterly and said it was a joke. I watched the tears seep out of her closed eyes. For the rest of my life, I could not understand women who want the illusion of love and at the same time easily betray vows of love and fidelity with a man who is not their husband. I looked at her hand and noticed that for the first time since we met, Lisa took off her ring. She had never taken it off before, and the sight of its shine always made her cry. This time it was different. She lay down in the bathtub and told in an even voice that one day she returned early in the morning and, not finding her husband, although she saw his car at the entrance, went to look for Rita. She found the back door of Rita's house open and, seeing traces of familiar clothes, went upstairs to see her husband using Rita in the bathroom. They didn't even hear me. They were both grunting and screaming so loudly. He hasn't been that passionate the last couple of years. I thought it was just stress at work, but I think he just needs another girl. I felt a flash of pity for the woman sitting in the tub with me, even though she treated me as nothing more than a tool for revenge. I noticed that tears were flowing from the corners of her eyes. She closed her eyes when she saw me looking into them, but the tears continued to drip into the water surrounding us. I was wondering what those tears meant: guilt for infidelity, suffering from her husband's betrayal, or bitterness at the realization that she had just found another illusion to replace the broken fantasy of perfect marital love. When we were dry and ready to leave, Lisa awkwardly thanked me. I gritted my teeth, telling her not to worry. I'm doing this because I have to. Lisa smiled her sad smile and said she was finishing her sessions. I couldn't help but ask a typical question at a weekend interview: why? Her answer gave me an idea of the Lisa I thought I knew, but who had been missing since that autumn night. I had a strange feeling that I knew what it was, but its name somehow eluded me. After a great lovemaking and release, there was an emptiness, a pain that could not be explained, and I couldn't wait for the moment when I could break away from the one with whom I was making love at that moment. It seemed that my heart and body were at war with each other, each wanting to move in a direction that the other hated. Of the entire group of women who separated me, Lisa was probably the closest to understanding my dilemma. After all, it was strangely similar to what Willa once told me when I asked her what she, a college graduate, saw in me, a biker who didn't have a single thing when I met her. She quoted some dead Greek: "We always strive for the forbidden and crave what is denied to us." It felt like I was back to being a cool biker who attracted all the pussies he needed, and not an aging married man who had to face the realities of life. But I didn't want to hurt Willa. I love this woman. I have loved her for many years. I still loved her, despite my actions. And my heart ached every time I thought about how she would feel if she ever found out. But I could not withdraw from the agreement. It would mean certain death. At least when I was dealing with these fools, there was a chance that I could sort it out eventually. In the end, my mind sorted everything out. This thing, whatever it was, with these women, was just something I was doing for myself. It had nothing to do with Willa, and until she finds out, it can't hurt her. Which meant I had to make sure these women were satisfied and wouldn't gape at my wife. And then everything will go to hell. 2 weeks earlier. You have to help me, Jackson. Ashton knows. He told me he was going to get a divorce. What the fuck? What does he knows mean? Who told him? I thought I was going to have a heart attack. My throat constricted and I could barely breathe when Willa's face flashed in front of my eyes. Accusation, rage, disappointment, and those tears. God, I did it. My sins have come back to bite me in the balls. Curiously, Miss Du Bois's voice rang in my head, drowning out Rita's hysteria. Jackson Miles, one day you will know the price of bad behavior, young man. The old bitch was right. I'm going to lose my family, my wife, and everything I've worked so hard for. Are you listening to me? The scattering of colors that flashed before my eyes when the vision of everything I had literally went down the drain gradually gave way to a gray reality. Or rather, Rita's almost feral face when she slapped me hard in the face. I recoiled, having well considered the worst mistake of my life. He doesn't know who I slept with, but he says someone will give him proof if he needs it. The pressure on my chest eased a little when Rita's words reached me. So he doesn't know it's me? I whispered hopefully. No, but it's only a matter of time before he finds out, retorted Rita. The tiny glimmer of hope faded as despair began to work its way inside me. Jackson, please help me. I have to do something about Ashton. He'll ruin me and leave me penniless. I don't care about the divorce. It will be a chance for us to be together. If we had some of his money, we could. There is no we, Rita. I love my wife and I love my family. We agreed that it was just an affair. I tried to keep my voice as low and even as possible. I didn't want to piss her off. It was impossible to predict what Rita would do when she was on edge. This fool was in her class of lunatics. You bastard. You just want to use me and throw me on the sidelines when it gets hard. I looked around in panic when her screeching increased by several decibels. Fortunately, there was no sign that anyone had noticed. The neighbors were still in their homes, probably sleeping off the unseasonal heat that spring morning. I put my hand over her mouth and pushed Rita further into the garage. Willa had never entered this part of the house. It was completely my domain. Shut up. I barked as Rita continued to stare at me, trying to free herself. Look, we both used each other. It was just making love. So don't talk nonsense to me about love, or that we have a future. Rita quieted down when she realized that I couldn't be persuaded. I thought we had something good besides making love. I love you, you know, she muttered, pouting and looking at me with her puppy dog eyes. The only problem was that I knew what was usually hidden behind that expression. Greed and callous disregard for everyone but myself. I sighed. It was like talking to a child. Only no child would ask me for help in sabotaging her husband's car. You don't really love me, Rita. You don't know how to live with a guy like me. I don't look like Ashton at all, and I probably only earn 30% of what he earns. I knew that nothing would help Rita more than common sense expressed in dollars and cents. She was a girl with a heart of gold, literally. I didn't immediately calm her down with my logic. Are you sure there's no way back? He doesn't know about us anyway. I may not be the best wife, Jackson, but I know my husband. Ashton was serious. When he makes a decision, there is no way to change it. The strange light that lit up in her eyes as she straightened her back told me that I was in trouble again. We may not have had love, but we had fun, Jackson. And fun is never free. It's time for you to pay for the fun and pussy parade you had, Rita whispered, grabbing the front of my t-shirt. What do you want from me, Rita? I asked hoarsely as a tremor began to tap dance down my spine. What I told you before. But we can't. If Ashton has an accident or dies, you'll be the prime suspect. And so will I, if anyone sees that you brought the car here or to the workshop. To tell the truth, I didn't want to be involved in Rita's nefarious plans. I've never avoided blood and dirty deeds before, but I had nothing against Ashton. The thought of physically harming a guy after I used his wife made my stomach turn over. Well, I'm not going alone. If I have to, I'll drag you and the other bitches with me. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she hissed this threat. The gleam of madness in her eyes made me horrified at what was about to happen. I have a solution. I'll ruin both our cars. You're going to teach me how to mess up a spark plug and what to do with the brake line. I'll make sure he uses my car when he has a little accident. Then no one will suspect me. I wouldn't ruin my own car. The harsh laughter that came out of that gaudy red mouth made me want to vomit. I was making love to a monster, and she was going to swallow me whole. Rita lightly touched my cheek with her hand, warning me before leaving. Remember, no excuses or tricks, otherwise we'll all go down. By Monday, my head was already aching. As Becky, Elaine, and Lisa increased the pressure. Rita obviously took the time to threaten them over the weekend. It was hell to hold out for the next week, and when I intercepted an envelope with a photo of me using one of the girls, I realized that Rita could no longer be held. On Wednesday morning of the following week, I went to work and a small group met with me in the workshop after I sent the rest of my team to lunch. I explained and demonstrated the basics and made sure to give Rita what she needed while I put on the gloves. This time, the group was silent, and everyone looked at each other with a mixture of anxiety and fear. Lisa lingered as the other women left the workshop and walked back to Elaine's car, which was parked a short distance away. Do we really have to do this? Do we have a choice? Rita will take us all to hell with her if we don't do what she says. Lisa's small, sharp nod told me that she understood. But there was something in her gaze that made me uneasy. It was as if something had frozen inside Lisa, and she had come to some kind of decision. It wasn't until Friday morning that I found out what the role of the rest of the band was. Rita's monthly bachelorette party was scheduled to take place the following evening. Ashton hadn't officially announced the breakup, and Rita was counting on him to want everything to look normal and her plan to work. She had to work on her car while Ashton held card sessions at Elaine's house with the rest of her husbands. I stopped going to these sessions and communicating with others. Guilt is a curious thing, and I couldn't look these guys in the eye after I met their wives in the biblical sense. Early in the morning, I saw Rita making her way to Ashton's car when I picked up the newspaper. Presumably, he took her car to get to work while Rita was waiting at the mechanic's house to pick up his car. I knew that Ashton's car had not been picked up because there were only 2 workshops in the area, and the second team had left on their annual trip to Vegas. Rita knew she couldn't call my workshop if she wanted to avoid suspicion if her plans went wrong. So Ashton's car will be on the road until Rita replaces the missing plugs after Ashton had an accident in her car on the way to church that Sunday. And Rita could claim, with the support of her small group of friends and neighbors, that the car was working fine when Ashton took her to work on Friday. Arousing Ashton's suspicions was her way of gaining power over her future ex-husband, who valued his reputation and hated anything that made him look bad. Of course, Rita planned to turn this influence into a lucrative alimony agreement. Willa informed me about the breakfast party while holding a cup of tea. She missed the last bachelorette party, falling ill shortly before it. My poor wife was out of sorts, suffering from headaches and a cold that made her eyes swollen and her nose red. She has even stopped eating lately. The last time she ate a full meal, I found her in the bathroom after that. She even slept on the couch, afraid to pass the cold on to me and the children. So are you going to the party? Willa's eyes rested on mine, and she asked quietly, "Do you think it's worth it?" I looked at her in disbelief and noticed tiny wrinkles appearing on her forehead and dark spots under her eyes. How could I have missed the fact that something was wrong with my wife? What was bothering her? Something indescribable flashed in her eyes, something that made the alarm in my head scream. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me something. "Dad, Justin is annoying." And in the same moment, everything passed. Willa hurried to resolve the dispute between the children, and I was left with a knot of anxiety that was twisting inside me. Earlier in the evening, I was on edge all day, watching the neighborhood live in its usual rhythm. The barking of dogs, the laughter of children, and the sound of the mower told me that life was going well, at least for everyone else. My heart was heavy with guilt, shame, and, to be honest, a lot of trepidation. Rita's plan was only for Ashton to have an accident and live under suspicion, which would force him to file for alimony. But anything can happen in an accident. I didn't do anything with my own hands, but I knew perfectly well that I was as much an accomplice as if I had worked on the machines myself. I was watching the house next door with an intensity that observers would find strange. However, all this went unnoticed, as Willa busied herself making custard pie for the girls' meeting, although she was going to refuse to participate in the party due to a prolonged cold. Dinner was held in painful silence, as I could hardly take my eyes off the windows overlooking Rita's house. The children were sent to spend the night with Willa's sister, and the house was eerily quiet in the absence of their constant quarrels. The group arrived at the house next door, and Rita, as usual, was loud, although the others were quiet. Ashton left the house and walked in the direction of the card game. When I saw Rita sneaking through the back door with Elaine, I knew it was time to put an end to this before it was too late. I opened my mouth to confess everything when Willa put her finger to my lips, distracting me from the window. I think we should play this old game again. I want to tell you a story. I was so distracted that I almost forgot which game she was talking about. It was a game we played when we first met. We used ordinary objects belonging to each other and wove a story out of them. My stories were almost always about cool bikers and their women, but Willa's stories were much more diverse. The memories of how we were before everything became routine, and routine awakened feelings that I thought I had forgotten. They also fueled the acid of guilt and regret that had accumulated in me. But Willa, I have to tell you something. Let me tell you my story first. No, it's something important. And what I want to say is no. You and the girls always thought I was dumb because I didn't talk. Well, I'm tired of being silent, and you'll start listening. The steely gleam in my meek wife's eyes told me that resistance was not the best idea. I stared blankly at her as she sat at the opposite end of the table. She had a button in her hands that looked like one of mine. Willa noticed that my eyes were looking at the button in her hands. I'm glad you noticed. Yes, it's a button from your clothes. She must have come off a while ago. I nodded, still a little distracted by Rita's plan. My attention returned to the table when I felt the heat from Willa's gaze. The story I want to tell you today is as old as time. Betrayal, lust, and revenge. All the elements of a soap opera are there. And it all starts with a button. A strange smile curved her lips, and Willa cut an extra piece from the pie she had baked and placed it in front of me. You haven't had enough dinner, dear. Have a piece of pie. There was something strange about Will, something I couldn't identify, but it was there. She was irritable. If I had to describe it, I would say that it radiated from her, as energy radiates from a classic car whose engine purrs beautifully. The evidence is 2020, and I was blinded by anxiety, shame, and guilt. I was absent-mindedly playing with a piece of pie and trying to smile at my wife. That strange smile, somewhere between a grimace and a sarcastic grin, played on her lips again. The story begins like most other stories. A girl meets a bad guy. A girl falls in love with a bad guy and marries him, despite the objections of the people closest to her. I nodded, although I was wondering what she was getting at with this plot from the movie Whole Life. The sweet aroma of the pie with a slightly strange aftertaste filled my mouth. God, I'm eating a pie when some people might be about to die. Someday, Miss Du Bois will send me to a special section of hell. I stopped, almost surprised. I hadn't thought about my Sunday school teacher in years, but I've been thinking about her more than once in recent days. I guess it was a feeling of guilt. No one made me feel like a sinner as well as Miss Du Bois. On their first wedding anniversary, the wife bought a jacket that her husband had liked for a long time. There was nothing outstanding about it, but she had been saving for a long time to afford this jacket and the antique brass buttons that she sewed on to make it special. He was so glad when he got this jacket. They laughed, danced, and had their first child that day. I smiled, remembering the first years of our life together. Not everything was sweet, but we weren't exhausted by life. We could still laugh after quarrels and tears. We listened to each other. We never took our anger to bed. The passion between us was then a roaring fire, a passion that we were sometimes too tired of to feel these days. After a few years and 2 children, the wife makes a discovery that changes their lives forever. My stomach clenched, and I stared at Willa. Was she still telling our story, or did she have another story? That look in her eyes made me hesitate, the question hanging on the tip of my tongue. Then he fell silent when there was a sharp knock on the door. The sight of Ashton on the doorstep almost left me speechless. Hi, Jackson. I decided to come in and sit for a while. The girls haven't finished their party yet, and I don't want to be the culprit. The guys robbed me, and I can't afford to lose any more. I brought some wine. May I come in? He stood there and looked at me like I was some dumb provincial who refused to let a neighbor in the door because that provincial was using his wife. Of course, come in. I muttered as Ashton came in and greeted Willa. It was also strange, this familiarity between them. We were friendly neighbors, but not in the sense of a kiss on the cheek. I frowned, but left it at that. Maybe I'm not the best person to judge Ashton. After the usual small talk and pouring of wine, Willa returned to her story. We were in the middle of the story when you came in, Do you mind if we continue, Ashton? I'm not sure Ashton wants to hear this story. Not at all. I'm sure it's really interesting. I'm all ears. For the first time in our acquaintance, Ashton began to annoy me. Anxiety gnawed at my insides, spreading its burn. I drank some wine, thinking that Dutch bravery would calm my nerves. So, one day this wife made a discovery at her friend's house. She was helping to sort out a wardrobe for a charity garage sale, and while sorting through clothes that needed to be sent for sale, she noticed that a brooch had fallen off her jacket and rolled under the bed. Being an orderly, the wife sank to the floor and began to grope for the brooch. Groping, she pulled it out. The brooch caught on a small knitted bag, and while she was trying to untangle the brooch, the knitted bag flew open. A small collection of buttons scattered on the carpet. There was such a narrowed look in Willa's eyes, and it made me nervous. I took another sip of wine, thinking, damn, even more work. The wife bent down and began to collect the buttons, working quickly until she got to an all-too-familiar button. When she heard the sound of approaching footsteps, she put the button in her pocket and closed the bag. "Hey, what are you doing with this?" her friend asked, reaching for the bag. "What is it? Are you collecting something? I never thought you were a collector." The friend tried to evade the question while reaching for the bag, but the wife was determined to get answers. In the end, the wife exhausted her friend. Okay. This is my collection of conquest souvenirs. Are you happy? When did you become a private investigator?" Her friend grumbled as she tied the bag and stuffed it into some corner of the closet. "Souvenirs of conquest?" Her friend grinned, replying, "Yes, all my lovers." Seeing the stunned expression on his wife's face, the friend laughed rudely and said, "Stop being such a prude, Willie. All the men I've made love to have given me souvenirs. Mostly buttons. It's a pity they don't do more things with buttons these days. It's nice to know that I was the closest to them, even if they had girlfriends or wives." After recovering from the shock, the wife managed to get out of her friend's house without breaking down and arousing suspicion. She told herself that it couldn't be what she was thinking. Her husband didn't use her best friend. For the first time since the wedding, the wife slept in a separate bed from her husband. My mouth is dry. I broke into a cold sweat when I realized that Willa was no longer telling some fictional improvised story, but my story, our story. The pain inside me intensified. She knew. She knows. My God, that's what the writers meant when they said their world was collapsing around them. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't say anything. I must have looked like an idiot with my mouth open when I looked at my wife. Willa gave me a strange smile, ignoring me and continuing her story. After several days of torment, she decided to ask her other friend. At first, that friend grunted and refused, but eventually broke down after his wife threatened to set all hell free. The wife had no idea that the truth turned out to be worse than the hell she thought her life had turned into. Her sweet husband wasn't just using her best friend, he was taking care of her school band. "Please, Willie, I'm so sorry." "Shut up. Don't talk to me." Having forced her friend to swear to silence, the wife plunged into despair. Was honesty the best policy? Should she destroy 5 relationships? How can she protect her children from the consequences? She was thinking about leaving town, but none of these options could protect the children. They were doomed to suffer the consequences of their parents' actions. She shut herself off from the only friend who was honest with her because the pain was too much. The lump in my parched throat began to choke me. The aching pain in my stomach was growing. One day, another victim approached her. Her honest friend couldn't stand the burden of guilt and confessed everything to their friend's husband. And out of their mutual pain came a sense of camaraderie, Ashton chimed in. The look of anger and arrogance on his face made me dizzy. While I was watching in horror, Ashton came over and kissed Willa, holding the back of her head with his hand. "Bastard." I barely had time to suppress the word before Ashton turned and looked at me with a grin that changed his usually good-natured face. "What? Did you think you were the only one making love to someone else's wife?" He reached out and grabbed the front of my shirt. My limbs were numb, and for some reason my hands refused to form a fist that I was dying to throw at Ashton's face. "Why, buddy? You can't move a finger, can you? That's what making love with a lab technician can lead to." What you're feeling is the effect of a highly diluted serotype of botulinum neurotoxin. We have managed to synthesize and modify it over the last year. That's why it retains low functionality despite a warm or acidic environment. Like wine. I stared at the half-empty glass of wine on the dining table. Willa was calmly eating a pie that was lying on the table next to a bottle of wine. She seemed to be stuffing the rest of the pie into her mouth while Ashton gloated. You feel like your guts are being ripped out, don't you? And there's still nothing you can do? Well, lucky for you. I'm not a bloodthirsty bastard. It will make you feel like hell, but after a rest you will be fine. Besides, the dose is too small to cause you real problems. That's why customers are willing to pay me for the bottles I took from the lab. I heard a click as Ashton's face disappeared for a moment into the blurry fog that seemed to appear before my eyes. He must have been snapping his fingers, because something flesh-colored flashed before his eyes, too indistinct to be clearly identified. So what happens if he takes a double dose? That would be dangerous, Willa. What are you doing? There is a toxin in the wine. You have to get him out. It will kill our child. Let me go, Ashton. It's too late. I took that bottle that you threw away after filling the wine bottles and added it to the pie cream. They were wrong, but that doesn't make us together. I don't want to be with you. There was a loud sound. You stupid fool. Do you think he'll take you back when you slept with another man and got pregnant? Willa was silent while Ashton ranted. When Ashton was exhausted, Willa sighed. I hope that you will find a woman who will truly love you. But if you want this, you need to make sure that your stay in prison is shorter, not longer. Right now, the toxin is working on these bitches and your poker buddies. Willa had barely finished when Ashton cursed and ran out the door. When the door slammed shut, Willa smiled dryly and walked towards me. It looks like it's just us. Why? I could barely make out my own raspy whispers. Because we're going to be together until the very end, remember? I'll never know how my petite wife managed to drag my ass and herself to our bedroom, but she did. Throwing me on the bed, she disappeared for a while. My thoughts weren't too deep as I waited for my wife to return and presumably deliver the final blow. I realized that my ears were starting to fail me when I thought I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. A shadow appeared, and I braced myself for the final pain that would mark my departure from this world. Instead, I saw Willa's blue eyes filled with tears that fell on my face when my vision cleared for just a second. I felt a soft pair of lips on my mouth before the soft warmth settled on the mattress. Then what was blurred disappeared into the darkness.